welcome. Eliel and I are so excited to be sharing with you this journey we've been on. It's been most of this year, actually, and this is the first time we're talking about it publicly, and our mission is to talk about it publicly. So we're super excited that we get a chance to do this, and we're very grateful for the Future of Film and allowing us to do this. We should start by introducing ourselves. Eliel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Eliel Camargo-Molina, and my Monday to Friday job is in academia. I'm a theoretical physicist, and I'm thinking about how the smallest things we know and the largest there is are related. The largest there is the universe, and in particular, when it was very young, the beginnings of our universe, and how particles, the tiniest things we know, affected that and are connected to that. But since forever, I have understood the deep connection that exists between art and science through a very, very special common place, which is the place of doing what you love when what you love is something that most people think it's not useful for anything. And that struggle is a perfect place to create collaborations and art and science collaborations. And through that love for those type of collaborations, I met Steven, and we've had a couple of projects in that direction, but this is for sure the coolest one.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I agree. But let's see. In the next hour, you guys can decide. So my name's Stephen Follows. I have been a writer, a producer. I've run a set up a production company that's now a story agency. But I also, the last decade or so, have become a film industry analyst. I often using the lens of film data. I try and understand how the industry functions, and then I seek to share that with filmmakers and film professionals to help people get their films created and funded and made and seen. And so I'm always interested in how things work. And I think one of the things that Eliel and I connect with that we both think is that as soon as we work out how something works, we try and work out how to break it and how to try and do something different and something unique and different and creative. And so when we started to explore AI, and just between us, we wanted to bring it to the film industry to have a look at what's coming down the pike, but also because everyone feels that film is accessible to them as an audience member, and most people in the audience will also feel like it's accessible to them as creators. And so it's the perfect example, it's a place for us to talk about AI and to think about how it may change the world in the near future and what that might mean for all of us. So just to sort of set the scene, we should start by talking about the journey that film has gone on. In the sense that when film was first created, what we now think of as film, so moving images, it was the child or the offshoot or the bastard offspring of things that already existed, narrative storytelling, books, theatre, things like that, live events, like it was more sort of akin to circus and things like that. But it started off in reportage in the sense that the image we have on the left there is from Lumiere's, one of their early films about a train arriving at a station. How true it is that everyone screamed and ran out the tent, I don't know, but I know I would tell that story, whether it was true or not, if I were in their position. But the wider emotional truth is that this is something new. But only 7 years later, we're seeing it move into something entirely new and grow up into its own art form and explore its own creativity in something that couldn't happen in any other space. And so we have there the Journey to the Moon and the sort of very early stop motion animation, something new. And that's an incredible transformation from an artistic as well as a technical standpoint over a very short period of time. And so one of the things that we're interested in is we are already in this AI future in the sense of the early days of it. And it's in our lives in many ways that we know and don't know. We know self-driving cars need a brain, but we also perhaps don't quite know why foreign language translation has suddenly got so much better in the last couple of years. And it's because it's using AI and doing far more than literal translation. And so as we start to see AI integrate into other parts of our lives, we're going to start seeing it be more prominent, but also be used in unusual and creative ways. And that's one of the things that Eliel and I are so excited by is how can we break it? How can we use it wrong? How can we then create art with it? And what does that mean for art? And what does it mean for the science and the science of the art? And I don't know if that's how you describe it. Yeah.
Precisely, because I think there's a lot of questions that we've already answered with AI, but there are the questions that I would say are analogous to the idea of seeing film as a moving picture. We have this extrapolation. We have computers that used to have programs and do things like a computer do things, and then AI comes and brought with it a lot of new possibilities, and they are being explored and have been explored to the extent that they have taken what computers did and made it better in so many ways. But what we are now starting to jump onto is the idea of, okay, but what is AI on itself? What can we do with it? What makes it a different thing, separate from humans or computers?
Absolutely. And one of the interesting things with any new technology is to think about how it changes society. So if you go back 100 years, people thought that maybe we'd all have their own personal helicopter, but women would still be in the kitchen. So they've overestimated perhaps the technological change and underestimated the societal or creative changes that will naturally follow. And that's a pattern that happens a lot whenever there's a new technology of sorts. And so when we think about what it is to be human, and then how certain technologies, when they're created, offload some of that to be human, we then reintegrate that understanding into what it is to be human. So an early example would be strength. It used to be very, if you were fast at creating something or very strong at creating something, that was a real benefit. And you can think in the evolutionary environment. But once we've got guns or we've got machinery or whatever, it becomes really strength nowadays is about attractiveness or about how you feel. It's not a functional use. We don't promote the people who are stronger. We do seem to promote the people who are taller, but that's a separate issue. That's an error in heuristics, I think. So strength was offloaded to machinery. And then as technology starts to get closer to the modern day, we start offloading things like calculation. So being able to do complicated sums in your head, or to be completely honest, doing any sums in your head has gone through a journey. You're not going to have a calculator in your pocket with something told to all of us as kids. And yes, I do. And it has many more functions than that. Information capture, access, storage, all that sort of stuff. Knowledge is no longer power. If I want to know how many types of pasta there are or how I fly a helicopter, I have a reasonable expectation I can Google it, and it will probably be presented in a nice video.
That brings a good point, and it's the point that it not only brings change in the way that we do things or creates new, faster, better ways of doing things, but also in some difficult to define way, it redefines what we assign value to as humans. Like with strength, as you say now, our relationship with a strong human has changed, but also calculation completely revolutionized the way that we do science, for example, and in the way that information also revolutionized the way that we have dinner parties, right? Because it used to be like, okay, what about this? What is the answer to this? And somebody would guess, and that's it. Now you pull the phone and find the answer right away. So a lot of wise people cannot be that wise as they were before.
Well, loud and confident people, let's not pretend that those people knew the answer. They could just win through force of argument and confidence, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now that's harder. Maybe it's a leveler, right? No longer it's just the strong and the tall. It's also, we can all do that machine. Maybe it's not just the confident and the loud that win the dinner party. Maybe it's the fastest who's got the Googles.
Totally. We were talking about the fact that you were before GPS. I mean, we're old enough that we remember a time before the internet, before GPS. You said that you were really good with location weather. I have always famously been terrible at it. But now it doesn't matter. We are the same.
This is all my Boy Scout training completely went out the window. This was I had a walking meeting with a friend yesterday, and we did a long meandering walk for a couple of hours, and then we had to sort of head straight back so I was looking at the map. It was only 3 or 4 turns across half an hour, but I kept checking the map, and I realized that I'd lost this intuitive sense that can I go left, can I go right? Because I'd offloaded so long navigation to something else that I'd lost that sense. And so as we enter this new world with AI, ubiquitous AI, one of the things that we'll be offloading is elements of cognition. And we don't know how much or which bits, but I can tell you that Eliel has written grant applications with an AI. And
okay, let me clarify this. I have not written a complete grant application using an AI, but I've used an AI to help me in the process of grant applications. Like every person close to academia might tell you that's like the more grueling, terrible, but necessary part of our job. And using AI to offload some of the, for example, finding connections between different ideas and different works, or pointing you towards a specific area where you can go and then read deeper. So I've done that to find, for example, connections between my research in physics and research in biology or new materials. And then once the AIs give me those connections, I go in and can, instead of reading 1,000 papers, I read 4 or 5, right?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that, the interesting, I think we're saying a lot of things of why AI is repeating patterns that we've seen in the past, and that's to a large extent true. But then it also brings something which I think is completely new and we haven't experienced before, and it's the fact that it's also touching onto things that we have we have not understood completely or even have definitions for yet. Things like when we say cognition, when we say intelligence, but even more so when we say like consciousness. I'm not saying, by the way, that we are even close to a conscious AI, but it brings the conversation forward and it touches the ideas. We don't even know whether an AI will be conscious. We don't even know what consciousness is. So it's in one way bringing all of these new tools to tackle things and offload things from us, but it's offloading things that we are even starting to understand, that we don't really have a complete definition for. And I think that's fascinating.
Absolutely. And it's a chance for us all to explore what it is to be human, but also as we get more into the everyday, it also makes us think about what our jobs are and what our identities are and what we want to do. And that's why, one of the reasons why we've chosen to focus in film initially, because it gives us a really good case study that's accessible to everyone. Everyone watches movies, but it's particularly accessible and perhaps becomes very quickly very real and very scary in some cases, if you think about replacing or who wrote that piece of art, whatever. But we're already feeling this in still images. So I do not need to tell you that AIs can create images, because they are all over the place. They're so ubiquitous now, and they're gorgeous, and they're now becoming not worthless, but when you can print something, there's an inflation of what impresses you. And the reason I chose this image out of the many, many millions I could have created or generated to show you an image is that this is from this was created by, there's an interesting phrase, Jason Allen, and he used an AI, but he's the copyright holder, I guess. And it won first prize at the Colorado State Fair. And it didn't break any rules, but rules will now have to say you cannot create an AI in the early days of Photoshop. What is allowed, photo tinting, contrast, and what is not, collage, whatever. And so this is actually a frontier that's happened in the last few months, but there will be new frontiers, and we have to think about what that means and what does it mean to create, who created that image, and who owns that image, and what does creativity mean? And in our world, it could well mean, just as one random example, if studios like Disney their entire, or most of their value is based on controlling IP, because they're the only people that can generate materials based on certain things. If I can generate it myself, in the same way I can tell myself a fairy tale based on something, it does undermine perhaps the essence of their business model unless they adapt. And if they adapt, then maybe it'll be fine, in the same way that computers sort of changed some models. But Nokia was originally not a technology company, or even Nintendo did playing cards to start with. So we're making no firm predictions, but we are saying that perhaps some things will change radically, as will our understanding of them. And so Eliel and I are really interested. Oh, by the way, someone's put in the chat, Getty will probably try and claim the image. What's really funny is that one of the first things that I think might be under threat would be the idea of stock imagery, because to pay for the perfect image that someone has spent so much time and energy creating seems strange if you can generate your own just from a few prompts, because you can say, no, I want a blue chair, no, I want that chair, no, I want it 1950s. But there is also a sting in that tail, which is that if the AI has only learned from previous images, it won't know what's current, and it will become increasingly out of date. So hypothetically, this is not a prediction, this is just a sort of, if you take the consequences one after the other, we replace stock image photography, it completely dies, we generate all our own images, but then they're frozen in time. And so you can imagine if it was 50 years ago, then all the new images would look like the 1970s. Who knows what will happen, but it's interesting to think about the consequences of if this, then that, and that, and that. And it takes us very quickly into uncharted territory, I think.
And there's two avenues there. One, you make a model that keeps updating itself, which is very close to the idea of having a model that goes around through the world, taking pictures, and then maybe, exploring and living a life, or it goes the other way, in which we have a successive set of models, like the old ones and the new ones. And that second one, to an extent, is happening already. So some of the old quote unquote versions of the models that we have now that are 2 years old, nobody's using them. And we didn't even stop to explore them fully because, things are moving so fast. And what does that mean? What is going to happen to those models? And when we advance, what direction are we taking to advance? It's going to be interesting to see how we look back through this very quick progress and start putting the pieces together.
It's interesting that we're always talking about how similar the human experience and AI is. AI should be worried about AIs taking their jobs because it's already happening.
Yeah.
So to move on to how have we been engaging this, Eliel and myself? So we're very interested in the intersection of art and science. We're also very interested in extreme experiments, not because we think that's the exact future we're going to have, but because they might reveal something, as well as being artistically interesting, and they may produce a result that also may be new and fresh. So we've been doing a number of things. The big thing that sort of has allowed us to get this far is that we didn't want to apply for academic funding or public funding. We commercially funded our experiments by getting a script deal. We'll share a lot more about this on the podcast series because we've interviewed various people and talk about our journey. But the short version of it is we convinced a Hollywood producer, we can't say who, that's part of the deal, to give us a development deal. We're not in the union, neither is the AI, but it is a WGA deal, meaning that it's a treatment first and then a feature and then the screenplay. And it's 30 grand for each of the 2 bits. And we use that money to do our experiments and to do the podcasts and stuff. We've not kept that money. And so we've been able to commercially fund this frontier experiment stuff, although we don't know what's next after that, because that's not sustainable.
I was just going to say that while it is true that in the podcast we'll delve deeper into the whole screenplay and the WGA deal as an interesting experiment, and also the engine behind this, the podcast is also, it got very quickly, will get very quickly to be a more wide exploration of creativeness, AI using film as an incredible, very good, I don't even want to call it proxy, but I would say base camp to try to explore all of these ideas and in a scientifically honest way. So as much as we're talking with writers and people from the film industry, we're talking to AI experts, researchers, and trying to bring that kind of ground level of understanding of this new kind of frontier that nobody really understands. And that's what's so cool.
Yeah, and someone's asked what it's called. It's called Authored by AI. It's not publicly available yet. It'll be a couple of weeks from now. But we've got film people like John August and Ted Hope. With the second episode is just myself, Eliel, and Dave Reynolds, who were at Finding Nemo, and the AI developing a script together, live, well, not live, but it's from the conversation. But anyway, that's something that's coming. So you can sign up to our mailing lists. You can Google it in a few weeks, and it will be available. It's not available right now. We're going to drop 4 episodes at once so that you get a full gamut of what we're up to. But anyway, let us tell you, it's called Authored by AI is the name. But let's show you an experiment. So we have created, oh, by the way, I should say, we are not selling a tool. We're not developing a tool. We're not Silicon Valley bros. I hope that was clear. But we're very interested in experiments, and we're very open to other people and working with other people. But this is not a big reveal where, please, can you pay us to download this tool to write a script for you? That is, for a number of reasons, nowhere near where we are and what we're interested in. Also, possibly not even possible. But what we have been doing is trying to understand how you might use AI to write screenplays. Now, in the past, there are AI-generated screenplays. One of the first for short film was called Sunspring by Oscar Sharp in 2016, and Ross Goodwin as well, who's the AI expert. But most of the ones you've probably seen thus far have a very, very avant-garde, strange quality to them. And that's partly the limitations of the models, and it's also how people have been learning how to use AI. And so we wanted to show you what we've learned and what we nickname Script City. This isn't a program, well, it's a program we have, but we're not giving it or selling it away. But it's a way where we create different instances of AI that talk to each other. So rather than going to one AI and say, give us a script, we do something far more complicated than that, and we'll show it to you in action. But as an introductory idea, think about if you went to all humans and said, how do you drive a bus? You'd get a bad answer, because you get the average of all humans. But if you say first, identify bus drivers. Okay, how do I drive a bus? You're going to get a much better answer. And so you can prime an AI to answer in a certain understanding. Now, to be clear, it's not that person. So if you say you are this minority, you have this experience, you've this lived experience, it's not going to know, but it will echo back what it's seen from the training data, which means it takes in bias and compounds all of the issues that we have already in the training data being the internet, essentially. Let's use that shorthand.
Yeah, so just to set it up a little bit more technically. So, some of you might have heard about already, like even publicly available storyteller AIs, where you can just start your story with like the first sentence and then it would develop it. Or you might have heard about things like GPT-3, for example, which is the publicly available largest state-of-the-art language model. And in fact, that's the one that we are using in its more general way as we can access it. And we are on top of that using that kind of engine behind to power Script City. So why that approach makes sense has a lot to do with how these models work. So as Stephen mentioned, the models are trained with a bunch of data. In this case, the case of GPT-3, the model that we're using to power our stuff is a curated version of essentially the whole of the internet and many, many books. And when one says that the model is using this data, is that, well, in this particular case, the model has been trained for the very specific task of predicting the next word given some words. Like you give it a sentence and it predicts what's the next word. And it gets trained by trying to do that task. And whenever it does it correctly, according to the data that it's seeing, it gets a reward. And if it's not, it gets a punishment. It's a super simplified version of it, but that's the idea. Then it learns, it incorporates those rewards and punishments in a way that then becomes a system, right? And this is done through a whole setup that includes neural networks and a lot of algorithms and so on. But essentially what you're doing is you're kind of giving voice to this training data. What that also means is that, first of all, don't get deceived by the simplicity of the task of predicting the next word. This is hiding a lot of complexity behind it. And if you want to try that, do it with somebody. Do the game of like predicting the next word, and then do it with a 4 or 5-year-old child. And you realize very quickly that there's so much that goes into our almost natural capacity of predicting what the next word is going to be. This understanding of, it's a lot of things that are baked into our brains and our language, because we are, after all, the masters of language. That complexity is baked into such a simple task. So don't get deceived by that. But the fact is that the model, what it's doing is predicting the next word. But it's doing this in such a large space that it's created of language. It's almost incomprehensibly large. The points where you can access, the points where you can start predicting those next words, and the places that AI can access to do that. A good analogy that I like to use is there's this story about the Library of Babel, which is, imagine a library where you just have books that have all of the possible combinations of letters and spaces, all of them, and it's an infinite library. All the books that will ever be written, that have been written, are there. You just have to know where they are. Most of them are garbage. Well, a model like GPT-3, what it does is that it goes through this library, and it's essentially picking out all of the books that don't have language in it, and language in the most general form of the word. And it leaves you with books that you open it and it's language, whether computer language, English, Spanish, code, but language. And then it's very simplified, but it's a good working model analogy to think about this stuff in the hour that we have here. But that's what it does. So because it's so large, you have to understand where to go, where to find the book that you want. And that's essentially what our prompts and our system is. And we in our exploration understood that one way to do this is to create a step-by-step process where we instance different personas that talk to each other. And each one of these personas is powered by this GPT-3 that is being primed to be in a certain place of that library, so to say. So as a long introduction.
Yeah, enough talking. Let's do some generation.
So yeah, go ahead, Steven, while I set up here these.
Yeah, so what we've done is that we have our code base that's working on top of the AI. What we've done for this talk, and this has been generated for this talk, which the reason I say that is not so that we get credit, but if it goes wrong, it's because we just hacked it together for this. But this is a very simplified version of what we've been doing. So this is not a tool that we're selling, and this is not something that is exactly what we've been doing, but this is a simplified version that works within the talk we're doing now. You can, yeah, that shared for a second and then disappeared.
Was sharing the right one?
It was, yeah, it was. So we're going to do this step by step, and we're going to ask at a certain point, we'll read out some of it, but we won't read out some of it because it repeats itself a few times. And so don't worry, we'll talk you through this. We're not going to disappear you on this one.
Yeah, just to double down or reiterate what you said, what you're looking at here now is kind of the front end, kind of like a website. And behind that, we have some code running that is querying this GPT-3 model made by OpenAI. So first of all, we're users. We didn't create this model. We didn't train it because that costs millions and millions of dollars, but it's using a model that is publicly available for everybody and creating an extra layer on top of it, which is what we are doing, specializing it, not by training, but specializing it by how we use it to write stories.
And one of the interesting things of our journey, and what we've been very fortunate, we've been able to record most of our journey with the podcast, means that you can hear how we've been learning. And one of the people that was very instrumental early on in our process was Ted Hope. You guys will know Ted Hope. He's a very successful, I think he's the most successful producer at Sundance. One of his films have won the most audience awards. He ran Amazon Studios for a while and has been a stalwart of independent film for a long time. He also is a movie nut. Like, he just doesn't watch TV, but he watches so many movies. And in our early interactions with him, we found that the kinds of questions he asked, we did a development session with him and the AI, and the kind of questions he asked were really interesting. And so, for example, a lot of people would say, and I would early in the journey, write me a movie or whatever. And it would give an average movie, which is not actually that interesting. But Ted would ask things like, what are the characters' longings and how do they change throughout the movie? And we're like, oh, that's amazing. And so when you learn to write better prompts for the AI, you learn to get better results. So one of the concepts that he shared with us was this idea that in the early studio system, when there was a full-time writer's room of people, one of the roles that someone would fulfill would be the wild writer. Someone whose job it was to be slightly mad and come up with left field ideas, because they would then bring in a creation and innovation, and then the other writers could help shape that into something that could be more useful or commercial. And so the first step that we've learned to develop when it comes with the AI is to start with this idea of creativity, because we're not giving it anything. Well, you can do that. You can say it's a horror film, it's this genre, this audience. We're not. Our experiment is an extreme example, and no one will ever use it like this, I don't think, in the near future, but it's a more useful experiment. So our first prompt is a very creative and unconventional screenwriter has a new idea for a movie. They've written a short essay outlining the plot. And so this is running live, and we'll be able to see that in a minute. Eliel, do you want to?
Let's for example, let's change unconventional to wild, just because I think you said wild, and I like that word. So just
let's do it.
A very creative and wild screenwriter has written that. So we're just gonna ask it, and now it's running. It's essentially, as I mentioned, it's the task that it's trained for is to complete the next word and the next word and the next word. And now we're running it 3 times. We're running that prompt 3 times in the background to get 3 ideas. So here we have them.
We will read them out. What we're going to do is we're not going to read them out this second. We're going to read them out in a second, but I promise I'm not going to steal them from you. What we've done here is we've asked it to come up with, we've asked it to write an essay, which is something that we've learned to prompt it. We've asked it wild. We've also, if you notice, written it in the past tense. This has already happened. And that's something that we've learned has been very useful as well. So the next step in this simplified example, if Eliel, do you want to jump to the next step and then we'll read it, is to pick the best one. So the prompt starts with, it might be a longer one, but it says, a movie studio puts together a committee of experts in movie scripts, storytelling, and what film audiences want. They're asked to score the movies, and the prompt continues. We just haven't got the space here.
Yeah, I can go to the.
No, it's okay. I mean, because I think they'll get long as well.
Goes with the score from 1 to 900. This is the score.
Yeah. So we then get a score. Now, one of the interesting things is that you often get misinterpreted by the AI, and not misinterpreted, but just doesn't do what a human does. So, for example, if you identify these specific job titles, there is one person who's like this, one person's like that, the AI gives you back an argument. This person thinks this person thinks that. So you have to use vague language saying a committee. You have to make the entity one entity. Otherwise, it struggles. Anyway, I'll read out the first couple of sentences for each of these, and the scores are quite similar. It got 87, 87, and 83. The first one, number 1. And by the way, we're going to ask you to pick which one we're going to develop. So think about which one you want us to develop here live. In a dystopian future, the government is once again trying to take away people's freedom using oppressive laws and rules. However, this time, people are determined to fight back. Led by an unlikely hero, who may be a politician or an everyday person, hedging their bets a little bit there, the underprivileged citizens of the fictional world rally together in the hopes of restoring justice and liberty for all. The story follows this hero on their journey across the world, coming up against unexpected obstacles along the way, while still finding allies in unexpected places. I'll pause reading for now because we're going to look through the others and then pick one. I'd say a couple of things. First of all, this is mind-blowingly impressive, seeing as it's come from nothing. But at the same time, if this were in the studio, if this were in the actual film industry, there is a lot of vagary, shooting for the middle, coming up against obstacles. Like, this would impress somebody not in film. But I'd like to think anyone in development would be like, okay, but I still don't see what it is yet. Let me read.
Also, I would like to point out the fact that don't try to extrapolate trends. Like I'm seeing here, for example, that the 2 first ones are kind of like post-apocalyptic stuff. There's no trend in the type of story that you think is spitting out. It just happens to be, it's like throwing dice. You searching a pattern in 3 dice doesn't So we just ask it, we haven't given it any input or idea of what the story is. You just happen to have come to do with two that are kind of in the same, but this is just essentially typically giving you just stories.
The second one, number 2. The movie is set in a post-apocalyptic world that's been ruined by a zombie pandemic. It's important to say it's been ruined rather than just experienced. Actually, I tell you what, a movie about it being improved is actually a more interesting movie. Anyway, a small group of survivors have managed to make it this far, and they refuse to give up hope. Most days they're spent surviving, scavenging for food, and protecting their dwindling supplies from the undead. But something strange begins to happen as the weeks go on. The zombies start changing, becoming smarter and more aware. This is really good. More aware of their environment, almost as if they were human again. The group soon learns that the zombie virus is mutating, and those affected are slowly turning into living people again. God, this is great. I'd watch this. As the survivors struggle to understand what's happening, they encounter other groups who have also been spared from the virus, leading them on an action-packed journey to try and stop the zombie pandemic before it wipes out all of humanity. Along the way, they form unlikely alliances, discover some dark secrets about their pasts, and fights off hordes of terrifying monsters. In the end, it's up to our heroes to save not just themselves, but all of humanity, or succumb to a fate worse than death. So again, fascinating, interesting, but vague. Yeah, and also slightly all over the place, but you know.
Yeah, but it went to this place where like you started getting to like, oh, imagine if the zombies start turning back and being human again. Imagine the remorse of people that killed a bunch of zombies and then we just have waited a week. It would be bad.
Yeah, it was like recovering from COVID. It's like, yeah, it's a terrible week, but most people come out the other side. You're like, you did what to grandma? Yeah, so number 3, an aging movie star, once known for their youthful charisma and charm, has reached a point in their career where they become desperate for any type of role that will boost their stardom. The actor takes on a part in an experimental independent film written by a young, somewhat reclusive screenwriter. The script centers around the release of an ancient creature whose wrath has thought to have caused the extinction of prehistoric cultures throughout thousands of centuries ago. As soon as the production begins on set, strange events begin to happen that disturb the cast and crew. It is revealed that the ancient creature is controlling them by tapping into repressed memories and fears, causing them to act out against their own conscious desire. In time, it becomes clear that the only way to escape is to control through confronting and ultimately purging these repressed memories. The movie ends up with our protagonist finally realizing strength is unlocked through buried emotions, ultimately enabling them to triumph over evil and emerge from productions with newfound insight into how our past experiences shape who we are today. So can we put a poll up, please, Storm? 1, 2, or 3 in the order we've read them. Which one would you like us to develop here? I'm going to vote. Actually, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to vote. Oh, it says hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Vote.
All right, fair enough.
Interesting that the score, I would have voted for the last one, right? And it's the one that got the lowest score. Although it's still 83, it's not bad. By the way, a comment while we wait for the results of the poll is that in our explorations, we of course tried to create different types of entities that would score the films. We started blindly with executives. Then we realized at some point, like, wait, why are we doing the executives? Why are we trying to reproduce a 1930s star system studio here in our code? And then let's just ask audiences, and let's just ask specific audiences. And we did that for a while. And then we realized, well, we can do everything. We can have an audience, we can have 1,000 audiences, we can have 10 people, 20 people. We can say it's just women, just men, or like young people, kids, whatever, and see, of course. And we have to be careful. This is never going to be, we cannot take it as an avatar of those people, and it's never going to represent them, but it's a good creative indication to certain points, typically obvious, but that we can automate. So it's that combination of a little bit of insight, maybe, but combined with the automation process and the fact that, you can put it together like Lego pieces in any way that you want. That was interesting.
Yeah, so if somebody had read all of the internet and understood it, how would they think, but never have been anything, they have no grounding, they've not lived, how would they think insert the person you're priming it to be actually like? So Storm says option 3 wins with 60% of the votes. So there we go. So we're number 3. So let's develop number 3. Thank you, Storm. Thank you for voting, everybody. So you need to, okay, there we go. So yeah, option number 1 only had 8%. Option number 2 had 32%. I would have gone with option number 2, but yeah, here we are. So we're going to put in, again, this is just our interface that we created for this. So what's interesting about this is that we could just take that and now adapt it, and it would be co-written with AI. That's perfectly fine. But what our experiment is to try and have no creative input is a phrase I have to say very carefully, because we are not giving it a genre, we're not telling it what to do, but we are obviously interacting with it in a way that is creative. So there are no creative, and someone asked in the chat, what are the prompts we're giving it? There is nothing we start it with. We're not priming it with anything other than what you see. You're seeing 100% of what's happening with the AI. Anything that's happening that we haven't prompted it is inherent in the AI model that somebody else built and trained. So we pick number 3 and we say, an experienced Hollywood screenwriter has developed the movie above. The new version includes a beginning, middle, and end, and most importantly, the end of the story is written below. And so we rewrite. Let's do this, Eliel.
Yeah, we're having a little bit of a hiccup here. Give me a second.
All right, you work on that, and I'll keep talking about it. So one of the interesting things that we realized is that why would you want an AI to do something that humans can do? Well, there are features around AI that humans don't have, and one of them is programmability. We can get it to do it more than once. We can get it to do infinite times. And so okay, great. So number 3, do you want to run it then, just because I'm conscious of time? So this is now a rewrite of it. This is just one instance of, and he's hit the button, but it's going to take a bit of time. You can see in the top right, it's running. It's now rewriting it. Now, one of the interesting things about the way humans write, and I would argue that most artists create, is with intent. They have some sort of intent that they're trying to get towards. And then they say, I want to be there, even if it's a feeling, and then they go there. AIs don't do that. They have no intent. They just say things. And that's essentially, you could say they're just bullshitting their way through it. But that means if they say something unusual and you say, why did you say that? It will in that moment make up the reason. It wasn't the original reason. There is nothing for it to access that was the original reason, but it will post hoc work it out. And where that becomes interesting is when you have unusual creative choices. So for example, someone we were talking to on the podcast said to us that they had been playing with an AI model that had failed to write a story because it wrote nonsense. And we said, what do you mean? And they said, well, it wrote a story about a character who died, was taken to the morgue, and then they had to escape from the morgue and they had to kill the mortician to get out. And that doesn't make any sense. And my response to that was, well, it doesn't make sense yet. But if you said to the AI, why did the person have to escape when they were dead before? This might now suddenly turn into a zombie movie, a vampire movie. Maybe it's Ocean's 11 and they were pretending. I don't know. But the AI would bullshit afterwards, whereas the human would probably have that in mind and would also probably be very bad at coming up with the reason, or at least if you kept saying, why did you do that? Humans would fray into, I don't know, and then run away. AIs get better because they're then bringing that understanding back, and it now becomes canon to their world.
So one of the things that I love to do is to bring this type of, not exactly this instance, but like the idea of this type of models and how you can access them, which, by the way, it's not that difficult, to researchers. And I was talking today earlier with a social scientist that she had to write an entry for a specialized encyclopedia. And I said, oh my God, I have something for you. It's going to make your job 10 times better and 10 times easier. Not because she's going to make it writer, but it's going to use it to understand, explore, bring ideas and stuff. And then she came today laughing and said, look, I was asking it to bring the thing and these ideas and having a conversation. And he started giving me references that sounded amazing from authors that I know that wrote about the things. And I felt really bad because I said, I've never read those papers. What? Then I started searching and they were made up. They were completely made up papers. So it's an incredibly, proficient liar, to the extent that people were using it in Stack Overflow, which is a site where people ask questions about computer programming. Because, by the way, it cannot just write stories. It can write computer code and program and explain code back to you on what it does, for example. But they had to ban it because it was just putting so many plausibly correct but wrong answers that they had to say, please don't do this anymore. Anyway.
It's fascinating. I asked it for a biography of me, and it doesn't know who I am, but it made up one that would sound plausible. I think it's, So anyway, so we've asked it to expand it. Now, one of the things you have is you have a lot of repetition because all it's doing is slightly expanding it. The only thing that I see there that's really new and interesting, so rather than read the whole thing, I just thought I'd read the last sentence. The movie ends with our protagonist having a heartfelt applause at its premiere and rave reviews afterwards, restoring their lost luster in Hollywood, and having found acceptance and catharsis with themselves through the conquering challenges previously thought unbearable, resulting in newfound insight, this is terrible English, into how we are unique beings connected beyond words or fear, but only if we choose to embrace that connection can we find real victory over challenges life throws at us, no matter how impossible it may appear from far away. Now, grammar notwithstanding, that's a new evolution. Now, it's a micro evolution from the previous thing, But remember, this is programmable and effectively free. I mean, there is a cost of calling the API, but it's a penny on a penny. So you could keep running this. And in fact, that's another feature of our full version of Script City, which is not this, which is that we keep running these loops. But that wasn't the main thing that we realized that would make it better. So in the movie industry, we don't just come up with an idea and make a movie. Well, I think they do that for Transformers, but we don't generally do that across most other movies. What we do is we have a development period and we have notes. And so we started playing around with the AI, asking it for notes. And so do you want to run this one? So the prompt we have here is a masterful storyteller has read the movie idea above and has written a list of instructions in the form verb instruction. That was about a month's work trying to get it to do something rather than just be vague, for improving the story so it resonates with people. So for example, for the one we've just read, it says, incorporate themes of family dynamics, love and loss, craft clever dialogue that builds suspense and reveals character development, expand upon the idea of how long buried secrets affect current behaviors. That's interesting. Number 2 is incredibly broad and could apply to most movies. Number 3 is fantastic. I'll read it again. Expand upon the idea of how long buried secrets affect current behaviors. I mean, that is I would watch 10 movies, 100 movies if they correctly or interestingly explored those ideas. So what we've done now is we've got notes, and I'll be honest, we've found that the AI is an average writer at times, but is a great note taker, really, really good note giver. And actually, one of the things that we did in our development deals when we delivered some of our treatments, we also delivered notes from the AI about how it would improve it. And so if you took an average person off the street, but gave them terrific notes, could you, at infinite time, or virtually infinite time, could you create a perfect script? We don't know.
And these notes are tailored to the story. In this case, because also the story deals with emotions and stuff like that, they feel generic, but typically it would just go to like the character or change these when we're getting a particularly good output right now at this stage, just being the first run, right? But I just want to point out that this is reading the text above and using that as a basis to give the notes.
But crucially, our prompts are not linked to that. So if we were co-writing it, you might say, tell me more about the second act, tell me about the character of Susan or whatever. Every prompt we've read, we've written here is generic, meaning that if we run this again and again and again and again, we'll just keep getting new stories and ideas. Anyway, we're running short on time. Eliel, do you want to do the next step? Next stage is we have notes. Yeah.
As you might have guessed, the next step now, if it's not that good at writing incredible stuff at once, but it's a little bit better at giving notes, the next step is implementing those notes into the text. And as Steven mentioned, then they're really unlocking the potential of the fact that this is also a computer. It's an artificial intelligence, but it's also a computer. Is that now we can go back and ask notes on that new version, and so on and so forth, as many times as you want. Of course, there's a little step there in the middle that we're maybe going to explore quickly, which is the idea of like, now what it's doing, it's taking each one of those notes separately and responding to it. So there's going to be some repetition because it's going to take the story, implement 1, then implement 2, implement 3, and so on. But that chunk of text, you don't have to clean it up. Sorry, you don't have to clean it up. You just give it to the model itself and say, please clean this up. Please remove repetition and make it nicer, prettier, fix the grammar. And then one that goes back to the note giver, and then so on and so forth. It does take a little bit longer because, it's going through 7 notes and thinking really hard, thinking, quote unquote, thinking about how to respond.
And it's interesting that we've learned that so I used to think that there was computers and humans, and AI sat somewhere on the spectrum between them. I now understand that AI is a third thing entirely. And there are instances where it feels very computer-like. You can program it. It will do whatever you tell it to do when it comes to sort of do this now. But it's human in some ways that it's actually quite lazy. It's got an efficiency function. It's trying to do as little work as possible. It also sometimes doesn't do what it's told. So if we have 7 notes, we don't say incorporate all 7 notes. We say 7 times incorporate this note, now incorporate that note, because otherwise it won't do what we're told. Many of you work in development, you're feeling very familiar here, right? Now, we are clearly not going to read through all of this because there is way too much on the screen. If it's a video, like, you pause it and have a look. And we expect this to be repetitious because it is doing multiple notes. But let's jump in somewhere in the middle to see something new. Overall, these themes breathe life into the script through the acting as a spiritual guiding forces, which lead our actor on an inexorable journey inexorably towards a greater understanding about themselves, as well as their relationships with those around them, allowing for an emotionally fulfilled experience by the film's end. Quote, "It's like my entire being is aware of something I can't quite put into words," end quote, the protagonist said, reflective and humbled. The screenwriter looked at him with a piercing gaze and replied, "Maybe that's because you're the only one who remembers it all." Now, that might be bullshit. Like I have no idea if that's actually meaningful, but it's interesting that it's written dialogue. We didn't ask it to.
But one of the notes was, remember, like one of the notes was,
oh, them too, yeah.
Yeah, it said something. Where is it?
Clever dialogue that builds suspense and reveals character development. Yeah. So we take all of that and we clean it up, because now it's a bit of a mess. We're thinking as a human, it's going to be sequential, but it may not be. And it may be in an unusual, like here it's written some scenes. Now, it's unlikely to have written the 60 to 80 scenes that you'd have in a movie. It's probably going to, because of its efficiency function, going to write too few scenes. In some of the early experiments we were doing, we were getting movie screenplays that have 40 scenes, and some of those scenes were repetitious, and yet that's not many scenes. But then, as you've seen a few times in this talk, who says that's wrong? Yeah. Maybe humans write 80 scenes in a movie, maybe AIs don't. Maybe they do. Maybe we need to get the prompt right. I don't know. What's interesting about this is that it's creating screenplays by AI, and then we're looking at them, and then it's a loop in itself. We as humans are using this, learning about what AIs are, learning what we are, it's learning who we are, and iteratively we're creating art.
In a sense, it's more of a collaborator in some senses than it is a tool, but it's also a tool sometimes more than a collaborator. And then, of course, the next step is just a cleanup. But I think for the sake of time, let's keep it up. What's going to happen is going to take all the repetition away and provide a shorter version of the text above. And then that can be looped back into the beginning. But you know, this is already a simplified version of the real thing and so on, but I think you got a flavor of what we're talking about when we say Script City.
So that was 6 steps, and you didn't even see the 6th step. The loops that we do when we have a full run of Script City will be hundreds and could be infinitely more, and it takes about 10 minutes to run a full thing. But where we get to the point where we say run, that's all we've done, you know, and we as humans, we may have pressed the button, and obviously we built the code, but in the instance, there is nothing unique about that screenplay. We're not reading it. Whereas actually the way people will use AI in the future is much more likely to be collaborative. And you'll hear that on the podcast when we work with Dave Reynolds developing a movie idea. Sometimes humans come up with the best ideas, sometimes AIs do, but really it's an interaction. And so we haven't got a huge amount of time, but there is a couple of things we want to touch on before we go, and then we'll address some of the fantastic questions we're getting coming in. So what does it mean for writers? Well, one of the things that we've heard that I think is really strong is that technology doesn't tend to replace jobs. It tends to replace tasks. And so jobs then evolve to incorporate those tasks, which allows you to do other things. So one of their interviewees was a writer who's written Hallmark movies and has written, or Lifetime movies, I can't remember, but he's written 5 or 6 of these by the numbers movies, and over a 3-year lifetime, yeah. And I was actually quite nervous when we started to interview him, because I thought that we would basically, I thought his job was the first to go. Whereas when we spoke to Meg Lefauve, who wrote Inside Out, I wasn't worried about her job being replaced because of the nuance. And so I was worried that this writer would feel like we're showing them the future, and they are the black cab driver, the yellow cab driver, and we're showing them Uber. But he loved it. He was like, this is incredible, because I could take the newspaper article that they've given me as a prompt. I could then use this to generate a first draft, just turn this into a movie, and then I can come in and do all the bits I really enjoy and all the nuance bits, because that's what I get to do. And when we spoke to Dave Reynolds and we said, look, let's say that hypothetically there's this perfect tool that you just hit run and it produces a screenplay. He said, well, he was the one who brought it up. He said, this is amazing. I'd sell it to Hollywood and I'd retire. I'd sell 1 a week. I'd retire and live on a boat. And I said, what would you do on the boat? And he said, probably write. So fundamentally, this is not going to replace writers. It may transform what we understand as writing, but so did laptops, so did spell check, so does Google Translate. So I don't think writing or writers should be threatened in large part, but I do think, moving on to the second point, that writers should be massively engaged with this. They get to be better at it, they get to see what the future is. But crucially, if we don't, as creators, engage with this now, you know who will? The studios. And when we look at television rights, VHS, DVD, streaming, if the studios get to define, the only people that get to define the terms, they have a valid voice. But if they're the only people that get to look at the new technology and then say, maybe the new deal should be X, I guarantee you it's bad for writers, unquestionably, because that's their job. That's what studios do effectively. They create shareholder value. So we as artists, we as writers, we as filmmakers owe it to ourselves to engage with these tools to make our work better and more enjoyable, but also because we need to know how we need to protect ourselves. And it will not be possible to ban AI in any way that you can't, you can't ban. It's like trying to protect your privacy in a complete sense. You won't be able to engage with the industry without engaging with AI. But what that means is still up in the air. And there are many brilliant utopian possibilities in various areas that we don't know yet because we haven't done it.
When I don't know what's going to happen, and when I think about what the future might be, because I think if there's something certain about the future is that it's unpredictable, right? And I like the spirit of future film in the sense that the first statement is we're not trying to predict the future. We're not trying to predict it either. But it's always interesting when I don't know what to think and what to do, to look back at the tropes that already exist in how we've dealt. This is not the first rodeo for humans where a new technology comes and changes everything, right? And the first, there's always the loud noise of the dystopian narratives and the idea, oh, it's going to replace us. Oh, if it's going to replace us, we maybe shouldn't use it. But, this happens with computers, it happens with cars, and you name it, right? But the truth is a bit more complex, complicated, and messy like we are as humans. And yeah, there will be some jobs that will disappear, but some others that will transform. And the forces between, the people giving the jobs, the people doing the jobs, I think we don't have time to delve into here, but in the podcast, we're going to delve into, the film industry, what happened when VHS came, and then how that negotiation worked and it happened. Those past examples are interesting to understand how that kind of new technology that just redefines everything comes to be. And most importantly, like there's a last question there of like, what does it mean for humans? And I don't know you, Steven, I would say essentially, and with the most excitement possible, that I don't know. And this is there's millions of speculations that we could do and pretend like we think or that it might happen, but it's almost either it will mean everything, or maybe in 2 years, this AI this is the best that they can do, what we're showing that they can do right now, but we don't know. It's just the fact that we're facing the uncertainty of something that could potentially offload completely our cognitive abilities and tasks. Where are we going to be then? What are we going to do then? And I think that's not scary. I think that's exciting.
I couldn't agree more. It's very exciting. And I understand why some things may feel threatening, but there's so many possibilities. I would say that there's two ways of thinking about the future. One is what happens if this technology keeps getting better. That is a whole route for us to discuss. But there is something else to discuss. What if this technology doesn't get any better than it is right now today that you can use essentially for free? And we'll tell you how to in a minute. It still hasn't permeated all its way into the popular culture, into the operations of the industry. If the technology does not improve one bit from this moment onwards, it will still transform the industry. As you can see, like it already has accessibility. So you don't have to have a leap of imagination to see how much this is going to change everything industrial, in relations to creativity and things like that. So what we want to do is I want to touch on one last idea, and then I'm going to answer some questions. There's some fantastic questions coming on here. The big thing that we wanted to end on is, what should we do? What should Eliel and Steven do? We want to be part of an open conversation. We are so excited to be sharing this and sharing more. We're going to release the podcast in a few weeks, and we'll do more episodes and things like that. But we want to do loads of different experiments. There is the commercial realm. Of course, we could create a tool. We've discussed we're not going to, and we'll say more in a minute. It could just be we create art and create things on YouTube. People are doing that already. That's not only what we want to do. It could be academic research. Our concern, though, is that it becomes only academic, and there's some fantastic stuff that's been published that no one reads.
Wait, I just have to point out only.
I wonder whether you'd let me get away with that. Okay, go. The floor's yours.
Only academic is a red herring. I mean, I don't think I don't think there's anything wrong with something being only academic. I think it's a matter of I think it's very important for any kind of transformation and whatnot that things that are only academic exist. But I think what's interesting, and sorry to, it's my physicist. It's my physicist heart trying, because this is also being recorded. I'm like, wait a minute. But it's the fact that with AI in particular, we are also experiencing something very new, which is that it's being created and developed by a completely new way of knowledge making, which is not, when you go to the literature, the scientific literature on this, half of the papers are from universities, half of the papers are from companies like Facebook or Uber or, or Google. And it's interesting that you have this commercial interest trying to do this. You have also academia playing a role. Then there's also people. I saw an exhibition of art, like pictures of feet generated by AI, and that was a whole exhibition. It was very interesting. I'm not saying that it was bad, but the kind of boundary breaking of art using AI, and all of those things need to happen. But we feel that there's a new space that has some of these characteristics, but that can also merge them in a new way, this kind of combination of the art, the science, that has never been possible in this way, in this magnitude before. And we want to bring it to life, but we don't know. We're really excited to figure out how. So we just want to throw that question back at you.
There are email addresses. We don't know. We managed to do all of those things so far, and we're by no means finished on where we are right now, but we got a commercial deal and they got a commercial product. We got to artistically explore the journey, and we also are doing research we think is academic and useful, and we're publishing it and sharing it in this format and other formats as well. But we want to explore all those things. To link us into the Q&A, one of the questions we've had is from Alex. He says, you mentioned Script City isn't something that can be commercialized easily. What are the barriers to doing so? There are engineering challenges, but fundamentally they're actually ours. We don't want to do that. I'm absolutely positive if we set up a company, we created a name, and we use the tech we already have, and it had a nice logo, we would get funding and some people would pay some. I don't think that's a successful route. It's not just that that would be a good product. People would fund that and people would buy that, but I don't think that's the best for where we are. We're so early. And I don't mean we, I mean we as humans and what AI is. We are not ready to create tools like this. Also, I'm not sure we're ready. I'm not sure the output will be good enough for that. It's more than a curiosity, but it's not yet in a kind of commercialization stage. It also doesn't solve problems we have. There's not a shortage of scripts. There's a shortage of good scripts and filtering and notes and things like that. But we do, so there's a few reasons, but it might be that one of the core reasons is that Eliel and I are fundamentally not moved by that.
And we are fundamentally committed on creating an open conversation, like all the ideas of sharing with you how we did Script City goes against somebody that maybe was trying to have a startup and sell this idea. We would be more zealous of it. And it's that fact that we believe in that space, that new space that we haven't completely defined yet. And that space we know what it needs. And one of the things that it needs is openness. One of the things that it needs is to be accessible, bring everybody, be something that lowers the access boundaries to all of this, to have as many participants as possible in this. And also that it's boundary breaking, that it makes you feel uncomfortable. If some of you felt uncomfortable when you saw our Script City version of today write a movie, that's great. That's what we want. We want to elicit that because that's what's going to call you to action and to understand what this is. So this is the space we want to be in. And by the way, this is neither of our jobs. This is not what's paying our bills. We are actually using all the money we got just to create that podcast and to do what the hours that I spent developing the front end and back end for this thing together with Steven, nobody paid for that. And we're just doing it because we believe in being open and creating this. So I guess that's an answer. It's also an answer to why we want to hear from you. What do we do next?
We have so many questions. we're overrunning a little bit. I'm going to pick one or two more, but then we've got to end it. But we want to carry on this conversation. So there's other ways that you can invite us to talk at other places. If you email us, we'll have private conversations with you. All that sort of stuff. But there's a couple here that really are indicative of bigger things I wanted to bring up. So Lorenzo asks, how much time do you think we as writers have to learn this new way of writing scripts before it's too late? It's a great question because it comes from a real fear. And the obvious short answer is, who knows? We don't know. However, there is a slightly more nuanced answer, which I think gets to the core of what you're saying, which is it really depends on who you are and what you're doing. We used the example before of Meglifo, who wrote Captain Marvel and Inside Out. Her job is very unlikely to be replaced in a very long time. Like you look at Inside Out and what that is, the nuance of being human. Maybe AI can get there, who knows? We're now in the world of sci-fi and speculation. But when you think about giving notes, if you want notes within your own project, and some people have actually said, how can I get notes on my script? Maybe this is fantastic, not because the notes are the best in the world, but because they are real notes. And maybe you play a video game to get good at something, or you spar in the gym to get good at boxing. You don't need to box someone. You don't need to fight someone or kill someone to do that. Maybe this is a sparring tool. And so the big answer to that is, I don't know when too late is, but I can tell you can do it right now, which allows me to say, go to openai.com. It's not us. This is the company that made GPT-3. That's the back end of this. You can sign up for free. And the time I last checked, they gave you $18 of credit, which if you're using the model we're using and the way we're using it, I think you'll never run out of that money, or at least it'll take a long time. That's a lot of credit. You get a little text box. You can type anything you want, hit enter, and the AI gives you answers. There's obviously loads of settings. There's other ways of using it. That's not how we're engaging it. We're using the API. We have spent thousands of dollars on the calls, but ultimately you can do this right now, and I highly recommend you do. And why wouldn't you? Go play with it. And another question someone had, which I can't, sorry for who, I can't find who said it, but it was a question about how people might use it. And we used it here for the original ideation, create the idea. And if that's something you struggle with, you like a prompt, but you know how to develop an idea or criticize an idea and turn it into a better one, that's how you might use it. But you also might run your dialogue through it and say, is this dialogue any good? You might run how you use it and how you integrate it is the same as how an artist uses a pencil, uses Photoshop. How do you use Microsoft Word? And to what degree is that writing your report, your whatever, your emails? Outlook is not writing them, but it is helping you format them. It is helping you spell check them, and it's taking them to the recipient. So they're performing tasks to help you do things that you couldn't previously do and explore new creative spaces. And I don't know what that will be. I don't know when too late is, but when's too late for getting a mobile phone? Probably now, maybe before, depends what you do. If many people don't have mobile phones, that's fine. So
that connects to another question from Matthew, which he says that I heard a producer say that before final draft, he was getting hundreds of screenplays a month and 1 or 2 were good. But after final draft, he was getting 1,000 a month, but only 1 or 2 were good. And the question is, will it increase quality? Do you think this will increase quantity and quality? And I think the answer is it's messy again. I mean, what I think as an outsider, but an outsider that has been using AI to help with a lot of things, is that it will redefine what's good and what's bad. It would redefine what a good script is, what value we assign. Some of the things would, inflate some of the ideas, and some of the ways in which we write scripts is going to be, maybe valued in a different way. And it's the same way. Think again back to the things that have happened in the past, like what happened to photography with Photoshop. What happened with spell checking. It's already a very good, simple, not simple, but more basic example of this. And I think it's essentially that fundamentally what it means to write a film is going to change, and whether as a writer you're going to be able to understand what that is depends a lot on whether you embrace this technology or not.
My main advice is play with it. Don't try and think of it like I have to save my job, I have to ruin this, I have to, oh my God, I can make $1. Play. And then from play, you will develop your route and your interaction, because I promise you, that's probably how you got into writing. Any of you that got into writing cynically to make money, we have other concerns for you and your logical process. But play with this and see how it fits for you, and know it's coming. Anyway, we have to end for time. Email us, talk to us. We don't know what's next. We want to know what's next. And crucially, it looks like all of our team, because we also had some people helping us with the podcast. It's not just the two of us. We've been the ones been doing these core experiments, but we've had some people helping us. It looks like almost all of us are going to be in the Berlin Film Festival, and we don't yet have a place to speak about this or to a panel or anything like that. We want to talk, we want to share, we want to interact. So if you're doing any event in Berlin, invite us, give us a nice cup of tea, and that's all the price we need, because we would want to talk and engage with the industry a lot more. You'll be able to get our podcast in a few weeks. It's not out yet because it's not ready yet, but it will be ready. Also, self-aggrandizing, but I think it's quite good. It'll be called Authored by AI, and it'll be available everywhere. If you really want to get on a mailing list, go to my website, stephenfollows.com, sign up on my mailing list, and I'll put it on there. But also email us, and we'll talk to you about it. And hopefully you'll see us a lot more in the industry. But a huge thank you to Alex, who we told this to before we did this in Cannes. We said, we've just got this deal. We know nothing. Can you help us launch this at some point? And Alex said, yes. I don't know what, when, how. We said, neither do we. And we really appreciate the trust that you gave us and inviting us, and also making this free. This talk has been free for everyone. We're not paid. No one's making any money from this particular talk, and I really appreciate that because it's in the spirit of what we're doing. So I want to extend a big thank you to Alex and his whole team.
Same here.
Oh, amazing. Well, look, thank you guys. I was suitably amazed and enthralled, and I just love that generosity of spirit of the project and your approach. So thank you. Thank you to everyone joining. Thank you to all for the interaction and engagement and all the great questions as well, and participating. And yeah, look, I hope this has, well, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it as interesting as I have. Do join us at the Future of Film Summit for the rest of the sessions. So you can jump in there anytime now, and we're live for the next week or so. So yeah, thank you for joining the opening session of Future of Film Summit 2022, and a final thank you again to Stephen and Eliel.